Hey folks, I know I'm just an old guy telling stories, but before we dive in, do me a solid, leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and let's enjoy today's stories together. Now, before we get started, I've got a quick disclaimer. The content presented in this video is purely for entertainment purposes only. Theories and stories discussed here are speculative and not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. So, sit back, relax, and let's get into it with the horrible Ladka. Welcome to the national park that doesn't exist. That's what I greet all of my tour guests with, though technically it isn't true. I work as the only tour guide at the aptly named Forest National Park, though we usually just call it the Forest, and it does exist. In fact, if you've ever been near the western half of Canada, you visited the park and probably even met me, but the moment you left, poof, memory gone. What? Well, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know, but it just has that effect. Outside of the park, no one except the government knows about it, yet it has this draw that brings in thousands of tourists every year. In order to keep these tourists from getting lost, they need a small group of people to live here full-time to keep things in check. I'm one of those full-timers and have been for a little over a decade now. We just got the internet here about a month ago and I've been trying to figure it out in my spare time. Well, got the internet. We've been asking for it for years, but our manager, Julie, is a stickler and only gives us absolute necessities. Once a month, Julie walks out to the edge of the park and speaks to someone on the outside with a two-way radio. Then a week later, in come the government guys with a truck full of provisions. We've tried asking them for stuff, but since the transient government guys don't remember we exist, much less our requests, it's a futile effort. Luckily, some hippie with a weird satellite dish on his van showed up. He hasn't returned to his van since then, so I figured he wouldn't mind if I borrowed his stuff while he wasn't using it. Lots of people on this page have fun, scary stories, so I thought I'd share a few of my own from my time here. I guess to start, I should probably explain what exactly Forest National Park is. Forest National Park is 50,265 acres big, but that only encompasses the memory effects part. The forest proper is a circular, 5-mile diameter section that gets deeper the further you go into it. Literally deeper, as in the trees get taller, thicker, and block out more of the sun the further you go. We keep the edges cleared so we don't accidentally wander into that part. Whenever one of us goes past that point, we call it a dive, and it's something I do daily. We don't measure distance traveled in there by miles or kilometers, but rather by the illuminance or lux of wherever you are. Actual distance gets a little bit wonky inside the forest. You can walk for hours and leave only feet from where you entered, or for minutes and be miles and miles away from home. We refer to our depth in the forest by the oceanic zones: sunlight, twilight, midnight, abyssal, and hadal. As you can imagine, traversing within the zones gets more dangerous the deeper you get, mostly because of the wildlife. We're kind of like Yellowstone in that way. The only things that are considered to be safe zones, and there are streams which run through all the zones because, for whatever reason, distance is exact and the forest is a little calmer around them. Okay, story time. I usually do my tours down the East Stream because it's the easiest to traverse, but sometimes I'll have a particularly advanced group of hikers who I feel can take on the challenge of the North Stream. Last time I did it was about a year and a half ago. A group showed up in a whole caravan of cars, dressed up to the nines in fancy hiking gear. I felt frankly underdressed in my green fleece ranger uniform and Stetson hat. They were very lively and enthusiastic, brimming with questions as I ran them through what the park was and what they were going to see. I tried showing them the well-trodden East Stream Trail, but I guess I went a little bit overboard on my showboating while explaining everything because I was immediately met with looks of disappointment. Now, I've never been one to let a good tour group down, so I said, "Alright, I don't usually do this, but since you all look far more experienced than most tour groups I get out here, we're going to go to the North Stream entrance instead." This got them excited again and we headed around the perimeter towards the North Stream. The reason why I don't usually take tours down it is for two reasons. First, it's much further away from the visitor center and I am just a little bit lazy, and second, it's a thinner, steeper stream that's much more rocky than the East. It not only increases the chances of people twisting or breaking things, but at certain points there are especially steep areas that require alternate routes that go away from the stream and into the forest. Even though the detours don't leave the sight line of the stream, going any distance into the tree line on either side is risky, even in the brighter zones. Everything was fine for most of the hike. In fact, I was having a lot of fun with this tour group. They were telling me stories from the hiking trip they were on in the Canadian Rockies. They had left out of Vancouver earlier that week and were stopping at every major hiking destination they could on their way to Alaska. One of the members of their group was someone they had met on one of their hikes and had decided to join their caravan. He was a scrawny kid, couldn't have been barely out of his parents' house, and he was quiet to the point of near invisibility. He stayed towards the back of the group and only spoke when spoken to. Since I wasn't used to going down the North Stream, and by consequence didn't have natural waypoints guiding me, we went much deeper than I usually take tour groups. I was having too much fun to notice how dark it had gotten. We were approaching another small waterfall that would require taking a detour around a tree with the trunk the width of a school bus when the kid spoke up. "Hey, can we, turn around?" He was jittering nervously and wore an expression of apprehension. I wasn't sure just how deep we were, so I told everyone to turn off their flashlights for a moment and I pulled out my lux meter. It read 0.062 lux. We were deep in the twilight zone of the forest, a whole 3 lux or about a mile, deeper than I usually take people. "Sorry guys, we have to turn around. You all got a longer tour than those tickets are worth," I told them. The group put up some light resistance, but followed along behind me obediently. The kid no longer walked at the back but instead right behind me. Even though we were making our way back, he seemed to be getting more scared, making whimpering noises at intervals. The forest has some weird effects on people's psyche and it was clearly targeting him. I've had plenty of people on my tours get scared, break down crying, hallucinate, even try climbing up trees to get out of the forest, so I knew this kid was on the verge of snapping. As we approached another waterfall that would require a detour into the forest, I stopped and turned to the kid to try to calm him. Just as I opened my mouth, the sound of cracking wood rang from the forest behind us. In what seemed like the same instant, the kid shoved me to the side, sending me sprawling into the creek. A couple folks ran to me and helped me out of the creek. I wasn't able to see him run into the woods in time, but I was able to stop the people who had chased after him. Once everyone was in order, we stood in silence for a long minute listening for the kid or whatever had made the noise. Eventually I said, barely above a whisper, "Follow me as quietly as possible, stay calm and don't stray off of my path." A woman in the group spoke up, pointing into the forest. "What about him?" "My main goal right now is to get all of you out safely. He's probably just ahead of us." So we walked around the falls and back to the stream, the sound of our boots crunching over detritus almost deafening over the utter silence of the forest. "Hey!" I whipped around and saw everyone looking into the forest. There was the kid standing just at the edge of what our flashlights could reach. The man who had yelled was waving his arms in the air and shouting at him, "Hey! Over here! Stop, HOI, stop!" I spoke above him. He turned to me indignant. "Why, he's right there? He heard you, he can follow us if he wants. I told you to stay quiet and follow me." Fortunately, he seemed to understand the gravity of my words and shut up. As we walked, the kid seemed to be following us, gradually moving closer to us as we walked. A couple minutes later, a woman in the group gasped and pointed at him. I've seen a lot in my time working here, not much really gets to me anymore, but my blood ran cold when I saw what made her gasp. The kid was much closer than before, but he wasn't walking with us. Rather, his legs dangled, feet dragging along the ground. I heard stifled sobs of fear behind me and picked up the pace. All at once I became aware of a noise emanating from the kid. It was less of a sound and more of a feeling, a pounding in my chest like a bass drum at a rock concert, the footfalls of something massive. I turned again to find the kid less than 20 yards away. His face revealed nothing, a look of utter neutrality, but just below it his neck was distended grotesquely as a spear the diameter of a forearm and black as midnight protruded from it. It was impossible to see where it went or what it was attached to, only that it was there by the way blood bubbled from the seam. Shortly after, he turned and lifted off the ground, disappearing into the darkness above us. The rest of the hike was calm besides a few members of the tour group openly crying. When we resurfaced, I didn't even have a chance to get a word off before they broke into a sprint, piling into their respective cars and tearing out of the lot. While I don't know, I can guess what happened to them after that. They left the park boundary and forgot. They probably think that that kid chickened out and left their caravan, completely unaware of his fate. I wish I was so lucky. The kid's car is still in the parking lot. There's a lot of cars in our parking lot at any given time. Makes us look much more busy than we actually are. I asked one of the government guys once why they don't just take them, and he said something about waiting until it doesn't look suspicious. I guess that makes sense, though I don't know why it's an issue if no one knows this place exists. It's not my choice either way. I have to get back to work. I see a car pulling in now and I think Julie would get mad if she caught me loitering around this van. I have a lot more stories and I hope I can share some more of them here before the gov guys take this van. Until next time. One of you was interested in the stories of the other cars that are in the parking lot, and, to be honest, I don't know what happened to the majority of those people. Not to brag, but not many people die on my tours. Most of our disappearances happen because people believe they don't need a guide to navigate the forest and wander off on their own. We don't see them come here, we don't know what happens to them, and they don't ever leave. That being said, there was one abandoned car whose owner was seen again. This was during summer a couple years back. One day after bringing a tour group back, I noticed a new car sitting in the lot. The owner was already gone. At this point, I don't even question new cars showing up. It's always the same conclusion, sometime later the government guys just take it away. I assumed that this one would be no different. A week or so later, Smith, the park scientist, asked me to accompany him on a dive to explore geologic features adjacent to the East Stream on the boundary of the sunlight and twilight zones. Usually I don't do any of that exploratory stuff because that's what did in Ranger Daniels, but I used to have a lot of respect for Smith and I didn't want to leave him alone to the whims of the forest. We started out shortly after 3 p.m. and our plan was to be out by 8:30 before the sun set. When our lux meters read 10, just on the edge of the twilight zone, we placed a stake on the bank of the East Stream and made our way into the southern tree line. I really wish I could say that some weird things happened, but it was about as ordinary as something can be when you're working in near darkness among trees taller than skyscrapers. To be entirely honest, I was bored. It didn't help that I know next to nothing about geology, so I just had to stand by while Smith was poking at rocks half buried in pine needles with all sorts of scientific equipment. I took to using my binoculars to look around for something to do. I didn't expect to see anything because where we were is deeper than most normal wildlife stray and too shallow for the other wildlife, but I noticed movement far off in a deeper part of the forest. I thought at first that it was some trick of the forest, but there, weaving through the trees like a drunkard, was a distinctly human silhouette. Without taking my gaze off the figure, I moved over to Smith and hit him to get his attention. "Hey, watch it," Smith said. Then, noticing what I was doing, he stood and asked, "What is it?" "I want to make sure I'm not going crazy. Get out your binoculars." He grumbled something about not being cryptic and looked out into the trees. "Well, that's no animal I know of. Do you think it's a person? Like an actual person? Let's not chase after it just in case it's not. Get your gun out." I pulled my service pistol out its holster and held it at my side. It was close enough now that I could tell it was a woman, and she looked much worse for wear. She seemed to be moving with some purpose, looking up to the treetops before stumbling to a tree to the left, then to the right and repeating. The movements felt far too human to be a farce, but I've seen a lot that felt real and ended up being a trick. She was on track to miss us some 40 yards to the south. She seems legitimate. I don't think it's right to leave someone for dead even if it's 50-50 that it's a trick, I said. Smith scoffed. "Fine, Daniels. Hand me your gun and go risk your life, I'll stay here." After glaring at him for his morbid joke, I handed him the gun and walked towards her. Once I was about 30 yards away, I called out to her, "Are you all right?" She jumped and turned to me, a look of primal fear in her eyes. She stood frozen, as if waiting for me to make a move before she could decide what to do. I raised my hands to show that I meant no harm, and she seemed to relax. When she spoke, her voice came out scratchy. "Where am I?" "You're in Forest National Park." "I'm Ranger Jackson." I pointed towards Smith. "That's Smith. We're going to get you out of here." I turned to Smith and waved him over to us. The woman hunched over and crouched walked over to me, reaching a hand up tentatively to grab my shoulder. Her eyes got wide and under her breath she muttered, "You are real." "Yep, now just follow us. We know the way out of here, all right?" She nodded and straightened up a little bit more. Smith seemed annoyed that we were leaving earlier than he had intended, but the woman seemed grateful that we were helping her out. On our way we asked her some questions and learned that her name was Grace and it was her car that had showed up a week ago. Whenever we tried to ask about her time in the forest, though, she would clam up. As we got further into the sunlight zone, it was no wonder why. She was covered in scrapes and bruises. Though strangely, her skin was a sickly gray and wrinkled like those hairless cats. I figured that it was just because of the humidity, but it rubbed me the wrong way. When we resurfaced, we took Grace into the visitor center to get her food, water, and medical attention. I wanted to get her to leave immediately since nothing we could do could help her as much as leaving the park and forgetting ever being here, but Smith wanted to keep her for questioning since he hadn't met someone who had spent a week in the forest and lived to tell the tale. I tried to argue, but Smith went so far as to threaten to get me fired. Getting fired is a fate worse than death, and Smith absolutely had the power to do it, so I had to concede. I left the visitor center, and it wasn't until 3 days later that I got any news. First thing in the morning as I was getting dressed for the day, I got a knock on my cabin door. It was Smith. Without so much as a hello, he said, "I can't get anything out of her. She asked for you?" Then he turned and, without looking back, started walking towards the research building. I followed him to the building and through its sterile hallways to an unmarked door which he unceremoniously opened to reveal Grace bound to an interrogation table with handcuffs. She looked terrified, staring at her hands and rocking back and forth. Without a word, Smith pushed me into the room and slammed the door behind me. Before I could do anything, Grace looked up and her face slowly stretched into a smile. "Ranger Jackson, your friend is a very bad man." "Smith is not my friend." "What has he done to you?" I said, backing towards the door. I knew she was restrained, but something about her smile made me feel like I was in immediate danger. "What hasn't he done, Jack?" "He wants me to tell him about the forest and he'll do anything for the information." "But you, what do you want, Jack?" My back slammed into the door, handle digging into my spine. Maintaining eye contact, I tried the door. Locked. I cursed under my breath and consigned to my fate, walking to the interrogation table and sitting down across from Grace. "I want to get you out of here, out of Forest National Park." "Why?" "When you leave the forest, all your memories of it go away. I can tell you are distressed. I think it would be best if you forgot your visit here." In a flash, her face transformed. She lunged towards me. In a panic, I kicked backwards, flipping my chair. I hit the ground hard and scrambled backwards. "What makes you think I want to forget?" In the next moment, her face relaxed into a smile again, and she looked at me in amusement as I laid on the ground trying to catch my breath. "Look at you. All you've seen and you're still scared of something just like you. Don't you want to be just like Smith? Don't you want to learn more?" I shakily picked myself up and walked a few steps back from the table. I noticed that the skin around her wrist where the handcuffs were attached had peeled back and blood was spilling onto the table. I just do my job, I'm not a scientist." Grace sat back down, an almost professional demeanor taking over despite the deranged smile across her face. "I know. That's why I wanted you here. I'll tell you what I know because I know you won't benefit from it. Please sit." Hesitantly, I picked up the chair and placed it some distance from the table before sitting. "Good. Ranger Jackson, what do you remember from before you came here?" For a moment I mentally stumbled as I tried to recall what came before the forest for the first time in years. I knew of the world outside, locations, events, cultures, facts, but I had no memories attached to any of them. I found my earliest memory to be feeling nervous as Ranger Daniels taught me the ropes of being a tour guide. I guess I don't have any." Grace nodded. "That's right. The forest is pruning your mind. It's a gardener, clearing weeds for a new, beautiful bed of roses. It's doing the same for me and I am open to its shears. I'm jealous of you, all of you, even Smith. Your barren patches of soil. But at the same time, I'm not jealous because you kill its seeds. I embrace them. When I was down there, stumbling through the darkness among terrible beasts, it killed me. Killed and reshaped me like the plowed as a field so I could be sowed. The seeds have just begun sprouting and soon I will be as wonderful as those beasts. Smith could never do that, he would sooner die. But you could. Right now you are a shell, but if you just walk among the trees you could become so much more." She stared at me expectantly as if she was waiting for me to jump up and run into the forest at that moment. "I'm content as a ranger, I don't need anything more than that." Grace's smile faded and she almost looked sane. "I understand. One day you will. Joining me is a far more gracious fate than choosing to leave. Daniels learned that and you will too. Goodbye, Jack." She was too far gone for reasoning. I tried the door again and it was unlocked. I left the research office and went to clock in for work as if nothing had happened. That night I woke up to Smith pounding on my door. "Ranger Jackson. Come out here right now." I got up, quickly pulled on my ranger uniform and opened the door. I was met with the barrel of a gun, my gun. Instinctively, my hands shot into the air. Smith looked mad. "Come out of the cabin and walk to the research building." I did what I was told. There's not much you can do when someone has a gun pointed to the back of your head. He guided me through the halls of the research center back to the room where Grace was being held. There were drops of blood around the base of the door, which was wide open. Grace wasn't in the room anymore, but the handcuffs had never been unlocked. On the interrogation table was her arm, laying in a pool of blood and covered in bite marks from where she had chewed it off. On the wall behind where she had sat, scrawled in blood, was a note that read, "See you soon, Jack." I felt the cold barrel of the gun slam into the nape of my neck, and Smith said, "Look, see what you did? You freed her and she ran right back into the forest." "I didn't free her, she chew." "Shut it. I don't know what you did, but she asked for you and you're the last person she talked to. One thing is right though, you will be seeing her soon. She's in the forest somewhere and you're either going to find her or I'm going to kill you. Which will it be, Jackson?" My mind was racing for any way out of the situation. Both options were a death sentence, but one afforded me a little more time. Smith marched me to the East Stream entrance and handed me a headlamp. Under the dark of night, the forest is much more foreboding. Every zone has the same light level, so it's almost impossible to know just where you are outside of measuring the width of tree trunks. The only person I knew who had done a night dive was Ranger Daniels, and he told me that, just like in the ocean, deep animals come up for food in the darkness. I started down the stream, every sound making me flinch. As I swung my flashlight around, I thought I saw eyes reflecting back at me from the darkness. Now and again I could have sworn I saw something moving with me just at the edge of my flashlight beam. Eventually, I made it to the point where I usually turn tours around, and I stopped. If I thought there was a chance I would die going this far, then going further is like digging myself a grave. Suddenly, I heard movement further down the stream. Distinctly human movement. I steeled myself and walked into the unknown. I followed those footsteps for over an hour, deeper and deeper into the forest. Eventually, the sound started coming from my north, and I had to stray off the stream and into the tree line. It was only a few more minutes until I saw her, curled up with her head between her knees at the base of a tree the width of a building. "Grace, you need to come with me." She slowly looked up at me, and her mouth stretched into an unnaturally toothy grin. "Ranger Jackson, I told you you'd be seeing me soon. I'm not coming with you, you're coming with me." She stood, and I finally got a good look at her. She had changed since I last saw her. Her sickly gray skin was loose and hung off her body like a burlap sack. The place where she had chewed her arm off had already healed, and a sharp piece of bone stuck out from the stump. Her eyes looked rough, like they were made out of stone, and her irises had gone almost white, giving her eyes the appearance of marble spheres with holes drilled in them. At that moment I decided that maybe getting shot to death wasn't that bad of a way to go, and took off running, but before I could make it more than 10 feet, she was on top of me. My head slammed against the forest floor and stars filled my vision. I tried scrambling away, but she jabbed the broken bone sticking out of her arm through my calf and started dragging me deeper into the forest. My vision swam from the pain, but I knew passing out meant potentially never waking up again, so I gave up struggling against her to save energy. I'm unsure exactly how long I was being dragged before I noticed a deer standing behind a tree just ahead of us, watching us. Grace noticed it too and stopped, yelling some nonsense at it. This seemed to scare it, and it ducked out of sight. Grace huffed in annoyance and continued dragging me, but there it was again, standing behind a different tree, only its head peeking out, just watching us. Grace stopped and yelled again, and the deer disappeared again, just to reappear on the other side of us moments later. She seemed to be getting extremely agitated, and she pulled my leg off her arm, letting it fall with a very painful thud. She ran full speed at the deer, yelling profanities, but this time the deer didn't move. She lunged at it and it dodged out of her way, leaving her sprawled on the ground. In that moment, I saw fear, real fear, cross her face as the deer reared up and its body split open, revealing rows of molars before coming down and engulfing her whole. Muffled screams emanated from its body for a moment until a sickening crunch silenced them forever. It continued chewing, the awful sound of Grace's body being rent to slurry, for several minutes as I laid in shock, pain, and fear on the ground where she had left me. Once it was done, it convulsed, body distorting as it swallowed the mush into a larger body somewhere just out of sight, and turned towards me. It walked out into the open and seemed to never end. Leg after leg with horribly twisted hooves attached to a flattened, hairy body emerged from behind the tree as it walked towards me. When it was right over me, I felt its hot breath on my head as it sniffed me. Then, by some miracle, it moved on. It walked right up to the base of a tree, and its malformed hooves crimped into the bark, allowing it to climb up the tree. It moved like a centipede, and it took quite some time before the whole body, which ended in a flat tuft of fur, disappeared into the darkness above me. I didn't move for a long time, but eventually I stood and limped south back towards the stream. I felt like I was in a dream as I made my way back towards the surface. It wasn't until I was well into the sunlight zone, barely brightened by the pre-dawn twilight, that I remembered Smith was going to kill me. When I got to the edge of the forest, there he was, sitting on a log in the clearing. He hadn't noticed me yet, so I ducked into the tree line and made my way south, just within sight of the clearing, until I could just barely make out the roof of my cabin through the trees. Then I made a break for it. Smith saw me and fired off a few rounds, which missed. I made it back inside, grabbed my lamp off the desk by my bed and waited for Smith. He burst through my door and one swing knocked him out cold. Smith left Forest National Park that day. He didn't tell anyone, leave a note, or even take anything more than the clothes on his back. Everyone was surprised. He had worked there for decades and had no inclination to leave. He wandered back into the park that night with no memories, a concussion, and a red welt on his head. It's a miracle that he survived. Even the normal Canadian wilderness is a force to be reckoned with. Andy, our honorary on-site medic, said that he must have passed out when his memories went and cracked his head on the road. Smith stayed with us, though he's a completely different man now. He relearned all his research and does frequent dives to learn more about the forest. I don't join him anymore. As for Grace, her car got taken away by the government guys a few months ago. To be honest, when they did I hoped it would be my last time thinking about her, but here we are. Despite her delusions, the forest isn't a gardener, it's a lumberjack, cutting down healthy trees to plant invasive species. It's just started to snow as I'm typing this. There should be fewer visitors now that winter is really setting in. I won't have to go into that damned forest as often, and maybe I'll have more time to write stories like these. Oh, one last thing, if any of you visit the park and have a lamp with you for some reason, I'll buy it off you. Julie won't get me a new one. Until next time. In my decade or so working here, no one's been fired. That's because it's about the worst thing that can happen to an employee, since the rules of the forest still apply to us too. Once you leave, all your memories of working here, often years and years, are gone. While no co-workers have been fired, there's only one employee who has ever disappeared. It's a name that I've mentioned in previous stories, Ranger Daniels. Ranger Daniels was the person doing tours when I got here. He looked to be in his late 40s and he had been working there as long as he could remember, not that that meant anything, since after that long of working here he had no memories of the outside world. Every other job position was filled, so he took me under his wing and taught me everything I needed to know about doing tours and staying alive in the forest. Once I learned how to do tours, I would take guests down the East Stream and he would take guests down the North Stream. He was a great guy, but he loved the forest. He loved it so much that he would spend every moment of free time exploring it, and occasionally he would disappear for days on end doing what he called camping trips. He invited me to join him many times, but I have a healthy fear of the forest, like any rational person should have, so I'd always respectfully decline. Because of how much time he'd spend down there, he was the prime source of information on anything forest related. Even Smith would get all of his samples and research from Daniels. Of course, whenever he found something new, he would come to me and open his almanac, it was a glorified diary, to show me some sketch of the most awful creature I've ever seen, all while beaming like a kid who just got told they can stay up late. About 6 years back now he started getting weird. He would constantly be jittery and hyper, like he had drank an entire pot of coffee, and spent more and more time in the forest. Whenever I would see him, he would be muttering to himself about some nonsense and writing in his almanac. He was distancing himself from everyone, not even guiding tours anymore. I hadn't talked to him in months until one day on my lunch break, while sitting on a bench in the visitor's center, he came running up to me. "Jackson, I figured it out." I nearly choked on my sandwich from the shock of him talking to me out of the blue. "Daniels? Figured what out?" "The forest, the memory stuff, all of it. The forest doesn't just feed on the biomass that enters it, it's like a hunter, it uses everything, even the bones, but it goes further than the bones, it feeds on the mind. If I wasn't before, now I was sure Daniels had lost it." "What the hell are you talking about? Have you ever noticed how, despite everyone who has disappeared over the years, people who work here never do? Why do you think that when people leave, all their memories of this place vanish? It's using us as a bank. It's overwriting our memories from the outside to make way for what it wants, the emotionally charged memories caused by interacting with it. But it's not. Come with me, I want you to see something." He grabbed my arm before I had gotten done eating and dragged me out into the cold winter air. We walked over to the North Stream entrance and made our way into the forest. One interesting quirk of the forest is that it's a lot like a cave in the sense that it stays a constant, if humid, 60 degrees inside year-round, so even though it was well below freezing on the surface, I had to take my coat off and wrap it around my waist in short order. After a couple of hours of walking, even with my jacket off, I started sweating. Looking around, I noticed the trees were larger than I was used to. "Daniels, where are we?" Absent-mindedly, he replied, "Broadly, Forest National Park, but I would say somewhere in the midnight zone." My stomach dropped. We were deeper than I had ever gone in the forest. I tried to stay calm, but I felt a panic rise in my chest as I thought of everything Ranger Daniels had shown me in his almanac. "Where are we going?" "Just a little bit further." He stopped just ahead of a large spire-shaped rock that jutted out of the stream bank and turned, disappearing into the tree line. For a moment I thought of abandoning him, but I knew, despite his obvious insanity, I was far safer with him than on my own, so I followed. Eventually he came to an abrupt stop. "Look, there it is." I followed his flashlight, but there was nothing there, just a small clearing between trees covered in pine needles. "What am I looking at? Don't you see, Jackson? The forest doesn't overwrite memories, it stores them. And if it stores them, there must be a place where they are stored. If there's a place where they are stored, then we can get them back. I don't remember my family, if I even have a family, but I could." He was twitching as he looked in hysteria at something I couldn't see. "Daniels, I don't see anything. Are you all right, man? Don't you want to remember?" "No. What's the point of trying to bring something back that's gone?" Daniels grabbed me by my shoulders. For the first time, I got a clear look at his face. It was wrinkly and mottled with blue veins. "They were stolen from me." He shoved me to the ground. "I thought you would understand, Jackson. Good luck getting back to the surface, I'm not coming with you." With that, he walked into the clearing and sat down with his legs crossed, slowly swaying back and forth. Part of me wanted to drag him out with me, but something compelled me to just leave him, so I did. I left him there, sitting in the forest, and I never saw him again. I write these posts over the span of multiple days because I don't have time with work to spend hours and hours in the van writing. Also, I don't want to make Julie suspicious and lose my ability to communicate with the outside world. That being said, I do not remember writing anything written above, but I think I've figured out why. It all started around noon today. I hadn't had a tour yet because of the weather, and I was working on shoveling the parking lot when Julie approached me with a man I'd never seen before. He was in his early 20s and wearing a blue hoodie and jeans. Julie gave me her classic fake smile and said, "Ranger Jackson, we have a new hire. He's going to be doing your job and I want you to teach him the ropes today. This is Danny Woodsworth." I gave him a handshake and introduced myself. The rest of the day was showing him around the park. Towards the end of the day, I took him into the forest and he was fascinated. He clearly had a passion for nature and seemed like he'd be a really good fit. After the tour, I took him to the cabin where he'd be living full-time. When I saw it, covered in creeping vines and completely untouched for years, something nagged at the back of my mind. I ignored it and showed him inside. Besides the fact everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, it looked like someone was already living in it. The bed was unmade, clothes littered the floor, and papers covered the desk. On top of the papers was a leather-bound book, which I picked up. Just as I was about to open it, Danny interrupted. "Who lived here?" Again, there was a nagging at the back of my mind, but nothing came of it. "I don't know, must have been before my time," I replied. After Danny was settled, I left and headed to the van. I thought that I hadn't written anything yet and figured that I probably should, given how long it's been since the last post. But when I opened that computer, there was the post above, a fully written story that I have no memory of experiencing or writing with a name I have no recollection of. I went back and looked at my other posts. There was the name again, Ranger Daniels. Then I remembered the book that I had taken from Danny's cabin. I opened it and there on the first page was a drawing of an older-looking Danny with writing below it that read Ranger Daniels' Almanac. I don't know why I don't have any memories of Ranger Daniels, but I think Danny is Ranger Daniels. I don't know what to do. Everything just got way weirder than anything I've experienced in this place so far. What else do I not remember? I don't think I have much longer posting stories. Julie went to the border of the park a couple of days ago to order necessities from the government guys, and when she came back she was acting strange. Watching me a lot more and even following me around sometimes. I think they found this account and the stories I'm posting here. More than likely, this van and any way for me to contact the outside world will be gone by the end of the week. I don't remember ever applying for this job and I don't want to quit, but I don't want to be here anymore. I'm going to find whatever Ranger Daniels saw in the forest. It's probably going to get me killed, but I'd rather choose that over quitting or living with all that I've learned. Maybe Grace was right, maybe joining the forest is a more gracious fate. If I don't post again, don't assume I'm dead, it'd be a disservice to me in the case that I do make it out of this. Until next time. Alright folks, that's it for today's stories. I hope you enjoyed the ride, even if it left you with a few chills down your spine. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the Horrible Ladka for more creepy tales. Got any crazy stories of your own? Drop them in the comments and who knows? Maybe I'll be sharing them next time. Until then, stay safe, stay spooky, and I'll catch you in the next one.